Hey everyone, welcome back to The Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. Our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. We bring you weekly topics and thought-provoking guests to get you to stop, reflect, and think about what it means to be a leader in a modern world. Our aim is to help you become the leader you wish you always had, as we learn together and lead together. Today's episode is brought to you by my new book, You're a Leader, Now What? The Proven Path to High-Performance Leadership. The book contains many of the great lessons that we've been learning together during the Leadership Project podcast, together with many other lessons that I've collected over my 30-year career as a leader. The book is aimed at first-time leaders, but really there's lessons in there for everyone. It would be greatly appreciated if you could go and grab your copy on Amazon as either an ebook or a paperback, and if you could leave us an honest review on Amazon. Now, on with the show. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm greatly honored today to be joined by Rosie Yeo. Rosie is someone that inspires boards, executives to create powerful strategies. So she's an expert strategist, she's an expert facilitator, a keynote speaker, and she's the director of the Public Affairs Network. And she's the author of a book that was released earlier this year called Go for Bold. And Go for Bold is all about having bold strategies and getting organizations to look at their strategic intent and putting powerful strategies in place. She started her career as a political advisor, so in the political world, and did a lot of researching for federal parliamentarians in Australia and then into state politics, where she was also an advisor to the Minister for Health at the time. And that has led her towards where she is now in this Director of Public Affairs Network and this focus around strategy in her book, Go for Bold. So, Rosie, it's a great privilege to have you on the show today. Please do take the time now to say hello to the audience and give us a little bit more about your background and what led you to be with us today.
Hi, Mick. It's great to be here and thanks for taking the time. And hello, everyone who's listening to this. Yes, I started my life as a political advisor. Now, I have to tell you, when I was first working in politics, I quickly learnt that if you were ever at a party and someone asked what you did, you never said you were a political advisor, because all of a sudden, whooshka, everyone jumped on you. They had very strong views. But it was actually a fantastic starting point for someone straight out of university to start thinking about how do people create strategies for the long term and in the short term, including in crisis. And how do we learn? I think one of the best things I learned from a minister I worked with was, how do you take a wide view when you're thinking about things? You really need, in politics, to understand 360 degrees, what everybody thinks about a particular option. So from then I moved into working in government relations, first for an industry association and then in a consultancy. And then I established my own business. I don't know about you, Mick, but I often find your career and life cycles go in sort of chunks. So I had my political chunk, and then I worked, I built my business as a consultant in public affairs, and I'd done my MBA on the way, and I'd also did a company director's diploma along the way, and I found myself on a national regulatory board. So I turned up to a lot of strategy sessions, and I have to confess, which is a terrible thing to confess as a strategist, but I used to hate going to strategy meetings. I found them, we'd all get herded into the room, there'd be long and tedious presentations, and there'd be, discussion and confusion about, were we talking about goals or were we talking about objectives? And at the end of the day, everybody just wanted to get out. They just wanted to get to drinks afterwards. And I just thought, there has to be a better way. These meetings should be the most important meetings that your organization has. Why can't we make them more interesting, more engaging, and more powerful? So that's when I started doing a lot more research into what does great facilitation look like? And more importantly, what does great strategy look like? How do you bring it to life in an organization? And so over the years, I started testing some of these ideas, first on my government relations clients. I'm like, yeah, I'll facilitate a session. And then all of a sudden they were like, we know you've got your MBA. I know you did that government relations session you facilitated, but I'm sure you can do the whole strategy work as well. So can we just bring you in for that? So I almost fell into that part of the role. And loved it. So I spent a few years transitioning away from government relations and public affairs to purely focus on how do we make the most important conversations we have, how do we make them count? So I do now facilitate lots of strategic planning sessions for boards and executive teams, and also larger meetings. So whether that's stakeholder consultation between governments and industries and other, community members about important policy issues, or whether it's just those important conferences where big issues are being discussed and where, it's more than just pick and present. You actually want people to have interesting conversations. So I have to say, love my work, really enjoy it.
Brilliant. And yeah, to echo back some of the things that you said there, I'm the same in terms of having chapters in my life. I spent 15 years in defense aerospace. I spent 15 years in urban mobility. And now I've started my new chapter in my life, which is the leadership project. And I kind of believe that all of those things that led up to this moment for a reason. And now I'm serving the purpose that I really need to meet in the life. So I'm not surprised to hear that your experience has all built you in that way. I would like to unpack that a little bit as we then go up towards this importance of the work that you do now and how to make strategy a bit more fun than what it is. And I've been in those board meetings that you're talking about. So let's unpack it a little bit further. I want to come back to something you said about 360 view. So you said that one of the politicians that you work with was very good at stepping back and for any decision, taking a wide lens and looking at it from different perspectives. Tell us more about what that meant to you.
So at the time, it obviously meant that it wasn't just enough to look at an idea that had come forward or a potential policy proposal and think, well, we like this. It fits with the government's policies and seems like a good idea to us. Other people have recommended it. Let's go with it. It's really important, not just in politics, but in anything we do, to think about how does this impact on other people? What are the flow-on effects? How can we understand how other people both see what the policy's intentions are and also what its impacts are? That idea of being T-shaped is really important in any strategy, and particularly when we're looking at this. So, it's not enough. I think it was Astro Teller, the head of Google X, who was one of the people who said it, we seek people who are T-shaped. So that means they have a deep expertise in one area, but they're willing and able to collaborate across a really wide field. And I think the same applies for the way we think about things. Absolutely, we have particular perspectives and experiences that lead us to see things in one way. But the more we can actually open our minds up to the way other people see things and other possibilities, the broader perspective we bring to ideas, to issues, and to possibilities.
Yeah, I love this concept of the T-shape, Rosie. I'd like to unpack that a little bit more. So having that deep expertise in your area, right? So it could be your superpower, what you're particularly good at, and it could be a technical knowledge or it could be some other skill set that you're bringing to the table, but then having the ability to collaborate with those around you who each of those has got their deep level of expertise and or their superpower in what they do. But what you also were picking up on there was the mindset. And what I was hearing, you didn't use these words, but I want to test it with you, was you need to then keep an open mind when you're dealing and you're collaborating with those others around you. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. I think the most powerful word we can use is curious. If you're curious, if you walk into a room curious about what those other perspectives and opportunities are, then you're halfway towards being innovative and creative, and you can map out different pathways. I don't know. I think we all do it a little bit. If you walk into particularly as a director or, you're a senior person walking into a room, often we all turn up at those rooms really focused on what we're bringing. Why have we been asked into the room? We've got this expertise. We're bringing this expertise into the room. And that's fantastic. But if everybody's only focused on what they know and what their expertise is, then you miss the opportunity to hear what other perspectives are. One of the things, particularly as an introduction thing, you often find a new board will sit down at the table and the chairman will ask everybody to introduce themselves. And of course we all do it. Right? I'm Rosie. I'm an expert on strategy and I'm really good at facilitating, sessions. Sometimes I ask groups, instead of telling us what they're good at, walk into the room and say, what are you interested in learning about from someone else? What don't you know about that you'd really love to hear about from someone else in the room? And all of a sudden, it's like little doors open in people's minds. about what else is possible.
That's really powerful. And I like this word curiosity, but I love this idea that we're going to go in there with this mindset that we're ready to listen for something that we don't already know. And on this show, we talk a lot about deep listening and the work from Otto Scharmer called Theory U. His key thing that he wants people to do is that most people live in what's called level 1 listening, which is either listening for what you already know or listening for what you want to hear. And I love this kind of starting with an open and expansive mind, even from the outset. Really good, Rosie. I want to test something here, and it might be challenging because politics is always difficult. On that 360 perspective in either the political world or in business, how do you balance away from not just being populist? So where you end up going in a direction to placate people, but maybe that is not what is in the best interest for the majority. So how do you avoid the noisy voices maybe overly influencing the outcome when there's a different decision, whether it's in politics or it's in a business, there's a different decision that is better for the long-term health of the company and all of the people in the company, and you're not just being distracted by, let's say, the loudest voices in the room?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first of all, in politics, and speaking about someone who has sort of stepped back from that whole political environment, it's a fundamental problem because in government, people need to make bold decisions and brave decisions, and they're not going to be loved by everyone. And this, we see, particularly in short election cycles, we see this happening all the time. And in fact, we also see, I think, in politics, because everybody knows the election's coming up, we have 3-year federal election cycles, and sometimes it's less than that. And because everybody knows that election's coming up, it's very difficult for governments to make bold decisions, for politicians to make bold decisions. And what that means is that we don't, the government departments and bureaucracies are spending a lot of time looking further out ahead, trying to map the future with really long-term strategies and policies. But in the political arena, so much of the focus is on, what is this election, what are these election promises going to mean for me next month or the month after? It's really difficult to make those bold and brave decisions. I think in an organisation, and I suppose particularly when you talk about the loudest voices in the room, part of that is because you're right, it can happen anytime. Anytime you're in a room, there are always people who are louder and always people who want to sit back and listen or don't feel as empowered to say what they think. And that's where strategy, the process of talking about strategy, how you approach those conversations is incredibly important because someone has to control that and manage the process so that everybody in the room does feel like they have a room, they have a voice, and they've been listened to. And that's why you can't do strategy fast. You do need to take the time and give people the time and space and manage the process of the conversation really carefully.
All right, so that's a good segue for us to get into the meat of today's topic, which is about setting those strategies, about those board meetings. It could be at the board or the executive of a company. Strategy can also be about your team that you're working in at the working level as well. But let's generalize around the boardroom for now. I'm going to challenge you for a second here, Rosie, and just see where this takes us. You spoke about strategy in times of turbulence, and the world is changing at an unprecedented rate. And I'm not just talking about pandemics. I'm talking about everything that's happened in the last 5 years, 10 years. The speed of change in the world is increasing at a rate that I certainly never imagined. So I'm going to put a challenging question to you. In a world of constant change, do we even need a strategy?
Look, I would say absolutely yes, but it has to be the right strategy. And I think in a world of constant change and uncertainty, what we need to do is think about looking at strategy from 2 lenses. The first thing we need to do is we absolutely need to understand what our shared long-term ambition is. So where are we trying to get to over time? It's like, what is that mountain we're trying to climb? We've got to keep our focus fixed on that. But at the same time, we've got to be open to being adaptable and flexible about how we find our way up to the mountain. Now, people will say to you, well, we just can't choose. But if you can see that mountain in the future and you're clear about which direction you're going to go, and you're right down in the bottom of the valley, walking along a dry riverbed, okay, if you're only focused on the riverbed and what's right in front of you, you will only see that the way forward is just scrambling over the rocks and keep going along that riverbed. If you know that where you're actually trying to get to is that mountain, all of a sudden you look up, you look around, and you start to see a wider perspective. So all of a sudden, there's not just one path forward over the rocks. There's actually multiple options for how you could get up to that mountain. And so the trick in strategy in uncertain times is understanding and being clear about what that long-term ambition is, and then being open enough to find the different ways forward, which may change. There might be a bit of zigging and zagging, but you know where you're trying to get to.
All right, very good. So having the ultimate vision of the peak of that mountain that you're heading towards, very good. And then having the ability, the flexibility to look down and around you to identify the flexibility to find different paths to achieve the outcome that you're trying to achieve. I'm with you on that one. And I'm also picking up there that this can also be when, let's say that you're navigating the ocean and a big wave starts coming, that you're also ready to navigate some of the changes that happen around you. So I'm fully with you on that one. Next challenging one, how do you make sure it's the right mountain in the first place?
That's a really big question. And I think, first of all, you have to have the time to think about it and take that time to really explore what all the options are. And I think more and more organizations these days, it's not just about, we have a very broad approach now to what setting that ambition is all about. It's not just about a dollar sign, or it's not just about, what our profit target is, or how far our geographic, we want to spread our geographic footprint. It is actually about who we are as an organization. What's our core values? What's our core purpose? And if you get that right, then you're right. Sometimes the mountains do change, but you still know the direction you're going in.
Okay. So that's about having a powerful why, where everyone in the organization knows why you're doing it. They're not just focused on why are you getting to the top of the mountain because we want to stick a flag in the top of it. No, you're doing it for a reason. And that gives everyone in the company purpose and meaning in what they do, which is something that I think is sorely missing in many companies today. And we see the great resignation in the US, and a lot of people are saying that is a great revolt or a great realization. There's all kinds of words that people are using, but one of the common threads is that everyone in the organization, from the lowest levels to the top level of the organization, wants purpose and meaning in what they do. What's your reflection on that?
I think that's absolutely right. And I think one of the things that's changed over the last 2 years is that people have started to think a bit more about, they want to see more change in what we do and how we do it. I mean, even just the massive changes to moving to remote work and flexibility. I think part of that has, it's one thing about how you live your life and how you manage things around your life. But I think also it's sort of led us all to start questioning, what we do in our families, how we do what we do at work. There's a whole lot of unbalancing here, if you like, and opportunity to rethink. And I think we're more open now to thinking about, how do I restructure things, whether that's in the organization or at a personal level. I think it's made us all more open to doing different things and also doing things differently. So I kind of often distinguish between those two things when we're talking about innovation, because everybody jumps at, we've just got to do different things. We've got to go off in an entirely new direction. We've got to resign. But sometimes organizations also can be open to doing things differently. So if we start to unpick, what is it that we've started to reconsider? How are our priorities changing? And then from an organizational point of view, start thinking about, how can we do things differently to adapt?
Love this, Rosie. So this is a big takeaway for me today. So focus on whether you need to be doing different things or doing things differently, and have a good, I'm going to bring back your 360 now again, and have a look at different perspectives and explore new ways of thinking and new ways of looking at exactly where you are today. It doesn't mean that you have to change companies or jump ship, whatever you want to call it. Have a critical look of where you are today, and can you find that purpose and meaning where you are right now? Can you find that drive that you seem to be missing for whatever reason? And can you do things differently to get your mojo back? It's the only way I can think of it. So yeah, really interesting there, Rosie. So what are your reflections on that, Rosie?
I think you're right. I mean, I think the first step is always to start looking at where you are right now and can you adapt and change where you are right now. I think sometimes the answer is going to be, actually, we do need to do different things. I do need to make a bold decision and move in another direction. I think we keep talking about this 360-degree thing. Again, taking the time to think about all the options, to wonder aloud, what could be, what's possible. All of this takes time. And I think sometimes we want to jump to a solution, but we have to give ourselves that opportunity to look around and think about what's out there and what could be.
Yeah, really good. All right, so let's come back to this strategy now. What I want to hear from you is, what are the most common mistakes that you see that organizations make when they get around that table? You said before, there's got to be a better way. So tell us about those common mistakes that organizations make today.
Well, I think the first thing is they rush in to do it because they've always done it. It's the 15th of the month and that's the month we do our strategy and that's when we're having our meeting. So let's go in and do it. And they dust off the agenda from last year and people start going for PowerPoints. Everybody then starts going, right, so the first part of the day, it's all going to be information. This whole series of mind-numbing PowerPoints. And information is really important and analysis is really important in strategy, but it's not the only thing. It's the starting point. We actually need to take that information and blend it with imagination and possibility. And, if you add one other ingredient, that really strong understanding of what your shared ambition is, then all of a sudden you've got a magic blend that can actually create powerful strategy. So I think, too often we feel constrained by the process because we have these PowerPoint presentations and we have, they become this blur of lots of dot points on flip charts and, labored points and a few people speaking up when others don't. So, this sort of the conversation can become quite tense or it can become circular. So I think thinking through the process so that it's not complex and overly weighted with information, but it allows people to open up and it's quite clear and logical as well. So people understand where they are in the process, but it gives people some time and creative space. I think sometimes too, you've got to build trust in the room. So sometimes people walk into a strategy meeting pretty convinced that nothing's going to change. Anyway, they sort of know what all the answers are before they walk in. So there actually has to be a level of trust built in as you walk into the meeting that what is possible. Now, sometimes it's really important to set guardrails. Say, we're going into a strategy meeting. Here are some things that are not going to change. For whatever reason, here are some certain things that we're not going to change. So don't give people false hope. Be honest about the level of their abilities, if you like, and the level of possibilities so that people can focus on what actually can change. Because there's nothing more dispiriting than a whole group of people spending a whole day getting really excited about an amazing idea. And then for the CEO or the chair to turn around at the end of the meeting and go, yeah, look, that's great. And it's been a great discussion, but actually, you know what? We're not going to be able to do that. There's no point. So building that trust and awareness of, what the guardrails are and what the open space is can be really valuable. And it may surprise you to know as a strategist and a facilitator, but managing the process is actually really important. I mean, a lot of the reason why sometimes I get brought into an organization because, things are a bit challenging and difficult in the boardroom or with the executive team and they want someone to take the heat out of it. Sometimes I get brought in because it's an incredibly high functioning organization or team, but the chair or the CEO or the team leader wants to be a genuine part of the conversation. And if you're facilitating the conversation, it's a different role to being in there and part of it. So they realize that for them to be in there equally with their team, you need someone else to manage the process and walk people through that.
There's some really powerful things there, Rosie. The first one, I've worked for the company that you were describing, I'm sure. So the one where, it's September, it must be strategic business planning month and everyone dusts off their PowerPoints and they bring it out and they just go through what they did last year and what was the easiest path to get approval? And it was this, you don't say this, you do say this, and you shape it this way, and you'll get the tick in the box so that you can say you've done it for the year. And then it becomes shelfware. That strategy goes on the shelf and you dust it off again 12 months later. So I've worked in exactly that organization before, unfortunately. The next thing that you said about the trust, and I like that openness about being clear. I hope people go into strategy with as much an open mind as possible, but being clear about what's on the table and what's off the table. I think that does help a lot, and that can help people focus on what is possible to change versus what is not possible to change. And then the third thing I heard about was then about empowerment. And then if the senior most leader is one of the team, not kind of being directorial and just everyone just looks at them sideways to go, well, he's going to make the call or she's going to make the call anyway, so we'll just listen to them. So that creating that environment where everyone has a voice and everyone has an opinion that is valued seems to be quite critical there.
And I would also say that creative space is really important. I don't think we give enough weight to giving people that creative space. And, it doesn't mean we all need to sit around in beanbags and, it doesn't have to be crazy. But I do think that if your strategy meeting is run the same way and in the same place as every other meeting you have, chances are the conversations you have are going to be exactly the same as all the other conversations you've had too. So just taking the time to think about what are some creative ways opening people's minds up. And it doesn't have to be complex. In the book, I kind of provide a whole series of ideas and some other references about how do you just shake it up, loosen it up a little bit. Even just rephrasing questions can have a really strong impact on the way people provide responses. If you ask people, what are the strengths and weaknesses of this organization? Classic start, tried this a few times. When you start looking at the list, everybody starts writing down the things that they want the organization to be. So all of a sudden the strengths, everybody's writing down, we're collegiate, we're supportive, we're hardworking, we're, all of this kind of thing. And you start to look at it going, hang on, is this the organization right now or is this what you want to be? And if you start just rephrasing a question like that, you could ask people, compared to your last organization, what's the biggest strength? What's the biggest difference in this organization? Or another way of, if you're sort of looking back and thinking about where you've come to, ask people, what have you changed your mind about in the last year when it comes to our strategy? You're still getting the same information about what we've learned, what we've achieved, where we haven't done so well. Changing the phrasing of the question can really make a difference.
So asking better questions to get a richer result is what I'm hearing there. You also brought up before about goals, right? So strategy is not about financial targets. It's not about this, et cetera, But many processes in these companies, that's exactly what happens. They keep on going through the strategy until they get the answer that they wanted in terms of either ROI or some kind of financial outcome. How do you balance this? How do you balance the financial need to fuel the success of the company, because it's the finances that do pay the bills and pay the salaries and fuel the future growth, et cetera, versus making sure you are focused on that end goal and that more important why?
And the financial goal is completely valid. I mean, we need it. You're right. Otherwise, the organizations don't, organizations have to make a profit if they're going to survive, at least in the private sector space. But I think what we can do is help people focus first on that bigger picture. So I like to think about, if you get people to start thinking about the intent behind what you're talking about before you go into the cold, hard numbers, because really when you're doing strategy, the numbers are an illustration of success. They're a way of measuring whether you get there. They're not necessarily the be all and end all. And I think sometimes we mix up business planning with strategic planning. Strategic planning is setting that story for what your organization is, that really clear and simple story for what, who you are, where you're trying to get to, and how you're going to get there. Then the business planning comes into it, which is where you do your financials, and it's a much more detailed planning and assessment and accounting often process. But they're two different steps along the way.
I like that delineation a lot. And coming back to the company I was talking about before, that was blended together. So I like this idea that strategic planning is strategic, and business planning, yes, that's about what resources do we need and what outcomes are we going to achieve. And the two should be connected. But
Absolutely.
I like that it's two separate exercises in your book. All right, very good. What about, we also blended before about long-term versus short-term. What do you see there is the balance between, if you're an executive in a company or you're a team leader, whatever the case may be, how do you balance what is in the long-term interest versus the short-term hitting milestones and keeping the company afloat, for example?
Mm-hmm. Well, for a start, you don't entirely separate out the two. You have that, I think just having that awareness that there are those two time horizons that we're playing with helps people take a longer term view. It's absolutely true that over the past 2 years, plenty of my clients, I normally work on 3-year horizons or 5 years or sometimes 20-year horizons. But the last 2 years, plenty of clients have just been saying, we just need to survive the next 6 months, or 12 months, and then we'll worry about the future. And I think that makes sense in the middle of an immediate crisis. But we've been in COVID for 2 years now. So you can't stay fixed in that moment forever. You need that longer term view in order to start seeing the pathways out of the creek bed you're stuck in right now. Yeah. So I don't think the two are, I think we need to just be aware of when we're moving our perspective from up to down, short term to long term.
Yeah, very good. Okay, thank you. One of the things that I read about one of your keynote speeches was that in times of upheaval, we crave connection and certainty. Tell us more about what that means.
So I think we've all gone through this over the last 2 years. One of the things we noticed was that just being separate from people, not being able to see people and be with people was one of the biggest challenges for all of us in our personal lives and our business lives. So I think whenever we're feeling uncertain about something, we want to be in it with people. Just knowing that other people are going through it with you gives you that sense of power and strength because you can kind of work on it together. So having that connection, whether it's virtual or in person, is so important in organizations as well. It's like if you're all in there together, you can again feel more confident in coming up with some brave and bold solutions for moving forward because you're not just out there doing it on your own. And I would also say that's relevant whether you're working in a very large organization or if you're just doing it all on your own. You still need that connection. And I often say to people, if you're running your own business and working a lot on your own, particularly with strategy, you still shouldn't do it alone. Think about it yourself, but find whether it's a trusted partner or a mate who's got some vague understanding of what you do, or even, in some cases, you can find a really trusted long-term customer or supplier. Sit down and have a chat with them. You're not asking them to write your strategy for them, but you are telling your story to someone else and testing that with them. And I think that sense of connection is even more important when we're not quite sure what comes next. And I think certainty, it's such a powerful word and we all love certainty, but we just can't always have it. I think it was Voltaire, the French philosopher back in the 18th century. He wrote, "Le doute n'est pas un état bien agréable, mais l'assurance, c'est un état ridicule." And what that means is it's not comfortable to be unsure, but it's absurd to be certain. If nothing else, that is what we've learned over the last 2 years. We can't control everything. We actually never could, but we still need to give ourselves the best chance for success by mapping what we think is most important and mapping our path forward.
So exactly right. And I love the quote. And we do not have a crystal ball. None of us can predict the future. And we've seen that more in the last 2 years than ever before. So how do you then break this cycle where strategy is a once-a-year activity, and how do you make it so it's actually part of what you do either every day, every week, or every quarter to make sure that you said before about testing assumptions with other people, but what about when those assumptions turn out to be not true and there's a change of circumstances? So how do we break that cycle?
I think you're absolutely right. You have to focus on it all the time. One of the things I suggest is that when you're thinking about taking a strategic mindset, there's kind of 3 questions that we should be asking ourselves a lot. The first is, what if? So, opening ourselves up to imagination and possibility, not just in a strategic planning session, but every time when we're problem solving or thinking about what to do next. The second question is, what about? Taking that wider perspective, looking around, seeing things from a 360-degree angle, asking, what would someone else think about this? What would our customers think about this? What could be different? Asking that second question is really valuable. And the most important question is what matters most. And obviously, if we're asking that question more regularly at our regular catch-ups, not just in the strategy session, then the things that matter most are going to be the steps that get us further along the path to long-term success. So by asking those 3 questions more often, we're going to be disciplining ourselves both to keep focused on our long-term ambition, but also to bring some of that creativity, that complexity, and that broader perspective into the decisions we make on a more day-to-day basis.
Yeah, really good. And I like this what if one, particularly around thinking about opening your mind to new possibilities, like forgetting what you already know and thinking about imagining a new reality. What if we were to do this? Or what if this was not a constraint? One of the ones that I like that's similar to that is what would need to be true for this to happen? What's your thoughts on that one?
I love that one. That's a great one. I'll take that. Thanks very much, Vic.
No
Use that in another session. No, it's great. What would need to be true? Because again, that's encouraging you to think about not just what do we need to do, what could we need to do, but looking again more broadly at the environment in which you're operating.
Yeah, really good. And then on this what matters most, how do you break that down? How do you, if you say that everything is the most important priority, it means that everything is the lowest priority. How do you get a team to really look critically and to determine what matters most?
Well, I often find sometimes it's one of those things where actually mapping things on a grid really helps. I was doing a session once with a social enterprise, and these guys are amazing. They're such entrepreneurial thinkers. But the first half of the session, there was just this cavalcade of amazing ideas and amazing possibilities, which was brilliant. They had about 20 fantastic ideas, but they couldn't do it all. So we actually got them to map on a really simple matrix. One arm was what's going to have the biggest impact in achieving our long-term objective, and on the other, what's implementable, like right now, what can we actually do realistically when looking at our resources and our pathway forward. And just by mapping that on a really simple grid, they took 20 amazing ideas and narrowed it down to like the 6 that were going to have the biggest impact, and they knew that they could actually do. And the most interesting thing about that was that you could feel the energy change in the room. It was like this weight had been lifted off everyone, because all of a sudden, as a group, they thought about what was going to have the biggest impact, what matters most, and they understood why they were going to commit to those and move forward. So such a simple exercise, but it had extraordinary power in the moment.
This resonates really strong with me, Rosie, and my background. And one of the key things that we haven't mentioned about strategy so far yet, but we probably should mention now, is strategy is equally deciding what you're not going to do as it is about deciding what you are going to do. And what I love about this organization that you're talking about, I could almost guarantee that if they attempted to do those 20 things, they would do a poor job of 20 things. But by throwing their heart and soul into 6 things, I bet you they knocked it out of the park for at least 4 or 5 of those 6. Am I right?
Absolutely. And it didn't stop the great ideas. Like, they still had the wealth of great ideas. We don't lose them, but they had this focus and energy on what they could do first. So that was powerful for them. And I agree, deciding what not to do is so important, because we absolutely can't do everything. And I think that's the thing we forget. Like, we absolutely have to choose. And those choices are sometimes really bold, particularly if you're stopping doing something.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean it has to be a no, not ever. It can be yes, no, and not yet, right? So it could be, let's take that organization again. The other 14 ideas that got shelved for a while, maybe they come back a year later or 2 years later, but on the back of the success of knocking it out of the park on the 6 things that they decided to do exceptionally well.
And I mean, sometimes too, I think we're very focused on, we've got to change too. We've got to do things differently. And that's pretty much valid for most organizations. But every now and then you have to make a bold decision that you are going to stay the course and keep doing what you think you're meant to do, rather than doing what everybody else did or what everybody else does.
Let's unpack that one a little bit more then, the difference between consistency and belligerence. It's the only way I can describe it right now. So consistency and persistency would be staying the course and believing that you're on the right course. And yes, we've got some choppy waters or whatever the case may be, but we've got to stick with it or we'll never see the fruits of our efforts. But belligerence would be barging on and ignoring that you've got massive headwinds and this is never going to work. How do you balance consistency and persistency versus chopping and changing versus, no, you're just being belligerent and you should have changed course 3 months ago?
Oh, look, I think that's the $1 million question, really. I think it comes down to being really thoughtful and clear about your long-term objective and mapping out what those various options mean. I mean, I haven't worked with them, but I was fascinated to read about, there's a Spanish company, corporate travel company called Travel Perk, run by their CEO is Avimir. And back at the start they were a business travel organization, right? So back at the start of the pandemic, what did every business travel organization did? They just shaved staff, they cut costs, no one was traveling, all the rest of it. He took a very different view. He actually decided we're going to keep all our staff. We're going to keep providing services to customers because they still need the services right now managing through the chaos. And we're going to start building other things, building other services that they'll need out the other side. So they kept all the staff. He talked about trimming fat, not muscle, and maintaining that commitment to their core purpose of supporting business travel. Not only did he keep all his staff, they went on a consolidation spree throughout COVID. They bought a whole lot of I think they raised like $275 million US to go on this buying spree that included moving into sustainable travel and other areas as well. They ended up becoming a $1 billion company, like a corporate travel company in the middle of a pandemic when nobody was traveling. They stuck to what they knew best and built on it and, extraordinary success. So that's a really interesting, I just find that fascinating that was the path they took.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And with every wave comes an opportunity, right? So with every kind of headwind or whatever the case may be, and how do you convert adversity into opportunity is what I'm hearing there. There's no guarantee that will work every time, but that's certainly an organization that decided to turn adversity into opportunity instead of crumbling. That's really interesting. All right, I want to know more about the book. So what led you to going, you know what, I need to put all of this experience and this knowledge and know-how into a book?
I think the timing was because I watched all of us in COVID, right? We amazed ourselves with our ability to adapt and be flexible and be creative in the moment. But I felt like, and I could see it with my clients, everyone was so fixed on just coping right now that everybody lost focus on their long game. And I wanted to find a way of encouraging people to take those amazing skills that I think a lot of us didn't realize we had. We didn't realize our organizations were quite as adaptable and creative and innovative. How do we take those newfound skills or newfound confidence and apply it to planning over the long game? So I wanted to come up with an option, a book that helps people think about strategy a little more clearly and to show people that it's not a complex, turgid process. It's actually an exciting and interesting and essential process that all of us have to do, whether we're running multinational companies or whether you're down at the pub with your mate thinking about what your next business venture could be. Like, we all have the ability to think more strategically and map out that pathway for ourselves. But sometimes just having a simple guide for how to do it can be really useful.
I like two things about that: the word simple and also that it should be exciting, not it should be, here we go again. It's like I said before, it's September, it's strategic business planning month and everyone just dreads it. So to grab a copy of Rosie's book, but also we'll get to this question at the very end, but get in contact with Rosie. If you're in one of those organizations where the strategy has become the dreaded kind of annual meeting that everyone just doesn't want to be part of, think about how you can simplify it and think about how you might turn it on its head and make it exciting again. All right, Rosie, that probably brings us to a close now. I'd like to finish with our rapid fire round. And these are the same questions that we ask all of our audience, all of our guests. So first of all, what's the one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
you're allowed to map your own path, and that can be unique in both in your work and probably in your life as well. Like, be comfortable thinking about what's possible for you and mapping that forward.
I like that. You're in charge of your own life. You're holding onto the steering wheel. You can grab that pen and a blank sheet of paper, and you can be in control of that. Love that a lot. What's your favorite book?
Oh, look, this is an old one, but I have to say Pride and Prejudice, because every single word in that book is perfectly chosen and beautifully crafted. It's actually a very short book, but it's just the language in it and the wit is just beautiful.
I like that. And the intentionality of the language. That's really key. Yeah, very good. What's your favorite quote?
Well, aside from the Voltaire quote, I also love one from Professor Roger Martin, great strategy guru. He said this: if you're entirely comfortable with your strategy, there's a strong chance it isn't very good. And the reason why I said that, the quote goes on to say that true strategy is about placing bets and making hard choices. The objective is not to eliminate risk. It's to increase the odds of success.
Very good. And this is, once again, are we turning adversity into opportunity? It's not about avoiding risk. In fact, the biggest risk that a company can do is take no risk at all, right? That's, really good. I love that a lot, Rosie. Very good. And finally, how do people get in contact with you if they would like to know more and potentially take advantage of some of your services?
Oh, fantastic. Thanks, Mick. Go to www.rosieyeo.com.au. You can also find the book at www.goforbold.com.au.
Brilliant, Rosie. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed today's conversation, as I knew I would leading into today. It's been really enriching for me. It's given me a lot to think about, and I know that the audience will be the same. So thank you so much for your time. We will put the links for all of that into the show notes so that people can find it easy. Thank you so much, Rosie. It was great.
Thank you, Mick. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Today's episode was brought to you by my new book, You're a Leader, Now What? The Proven Path to High Performance Leadership. The book contains many of the great lessons that we have learned together here on the Leadership Project podcast, together with lessons that I've collected over my 30-year career as a leader. The book is aimed towards first-time leaders, but really there's something in there for everyone. If you would like to show your appreciation for this show, we would greatly appreciate if you were able to go and get your copy of the book on Amazon as either an ebook or a paperback, and if you could leave us an honest review on Amazon. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Project podcast at mixbeers.com. A big call out to Faris Sadek for his sound design and editing of our audio and video content, and to the whole team at TLP, Joanne Gozon, Gerald Calabo, Rika Vidanes, and my wonderful supportive wife, Say Spears, who is also our operations manager. This show would simply not be possible without you. If you've enjoyed the show, please leave us a rating and review at Apple Podcasts. You can catch the video podcast and our video of the week at the Leadership Project YouTube channel, and you can join the conversation at the Leadership Project Facebook community group. We look forward to bringing you more great content and interviews next week as we continue to learn together and lead together. In the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and always remember to challenge the status quo.